This is St James's Palace, a real splendid piece of Tudor architecture. We've just seen its main gatehouse. We're looking right at the window of the Chapel Royal of St James's Palace now. Looking back at its main gatehouse again. St James's Palace is the most senior royal palace in London. The palace gives its name to the court of St James's, which is the monarch's royal court and is located in the city of Westminster. Although no longer the principal resident of the monarch, it is the ceremonial meeting place of the Accession Council, bear that in mind, the office of the Marshal of the Diplomatic Corps, and the London residence of several members of the royal family. Built by order of King Henry VIII between 1531 and 1536 on the site of an isolated leper hospital dedicated to St James the Less. The palace was secondary in importance to the Palace of Whitehall for most of Tudor and Stuart monarchs. Initially surrounded by a deer park and gardens, it was generally used as a hunting lodge and as a retreat from the formal court, and occasionally as a royal guest house. After the Palace of Whitehall burned down, the palace took administrative functions for the monarchy. It increased in importance during the reigns of the Hanoverian monarchs, but began to be displaced by Buckingham Palace in the early 19th century. After decades of being used increasingly only for formal occasions, the move from St James's Palace to Buckingham Palace was formalised by Queen Victoria in 1837. As I say, it's a real splendid piece of Tudor architecture, this one. Including having what would once have been called an arrow slit, but by the time of the 1530s would have been a gun port or a gun slit to fire on any wrongdoers trying to get into the palace. And if you walk up to its gate, and look through this here hole, you'll see inside. Leaving its main facade behind, leaving Cleveland Row and going on to Pall Mall. One of London's more famous thoroughfares. The Chapel Royal, the window of which we had a look at, any member of the public can go to a church service there, which take place at 8:30 and 11:15. Unfortunately, photography isn't allowed. So. Walking onto Marlborough Road. And this one here is the Queen's Chapel of St James's Palace, which celebrates its 400th anniversary this year. Built by Inigo Jones. As I say, the architecture of this one is pretty impressive. I like to think of all the history that these bricks and stones have seen and soaked up. And this here is Friary Court. The palace was remodelled in 1544 with ceilings painted by Hans Holbein the Younger, and was described as a pleasant royal house. Two of Henry VIII's children died at St James's. That's Henry Fitzroy, 1st Duke of Richmond and Somerset, and Queen Mary I, best known to history as Bloody Mary. Queen Elizabeth I often resided at the palace and is said to have spent the night there while waiting for the Spanish Armada to sail up the Channel. Prince Henry, Prince of Wales, the eldest son of King James and Queen Anne of Denmark, lived at St James's Palace until his death in 1612. King Charles II was born at the palace on the 29th of May 1630, and his brother King James II was born at the palace on the 14th of October 1633. In 1638, King Charles gave the palace to Mary de' Medici, the mother of Queen Henrietta Maria. Mary remained at the palace for 3 years, but the residence of a Catholic former Queen of France proved unpopular with Parliament, and she was soon asked to leave for Cologne. Charles I spent his final night at St James's Palace before his execution. Oliver Cromwell then took it over and turned it into a barracks during the English Commonwealth period. The palace was restored by King Charles II following the demise of the Commonwealth, and landscaping of St James's Park occurred at the same time. Queen Mary II and Queen Anne of Great Britain were both born at the palace. It became the principal residence of the monarch in London in 1698 during the reign of King William III, that's William of Orange, after Whitehall Palace was destroyed by a fire, and became the administrative centre for the monarchy, a role it retains in part. Also at the time of the loss of Whitehall, the Chapel Royal moved its base into the Castle Chapel at St James's. King George III married Queen Charlotte in the Chapel Royal. Queen Victoria married Prince Albert in the Chapel Royal, and King George V married Queen Mary of Teck there. St James's Palace is still a working palace, and the Royal Court is still formally based here, despite the monarch residing elsewhere. It is also the London residence of Princess Anne, Princess Beatrice and Princess Alexandra, and in more recent years, Prince George in 2013 and Prince Louis in 2018 were both christened in the palace's Chapel Royal. Inigo Jones's Queen's Chapel. And right here you're looking at the Queen Alexandra Memorial. The clock above the gatehouse there, which is a later addition, was installed in 1731 and restored in 1832. I hope you all enjoyed the little wander round and the history. Now for some historic images of St James's Palace, and then you'll get some public domain images of its interiors. So join me for that now. And here's our earliest image of St James's Palace, viewed from the Pall Mall side, the gatehouse, and this one dates from 1710, from the reign of Queen Anne, and you can see the palace, of course, and a very busy thoroughfare with people going about their business either on foot, being carried in sedan chairs, or travelling in coaches. And one of the things I really like about this image is, to the bottom left you can see a man in a tricorn hat having his shoes cleaned by a shoeshine boy. Just 5 years later for this image, 1715, and St James's Palace to the left, and the Mall over to the right. 1819 for this lovely painting, and this shows it from the Pall Mall and Cleveland Row side. The gatehouse is shown prominently, and to its right you can see at this point, before the alterations made to the Chapel Royal by King William IV, the slightly smaller window of the Chapel Royal. Just 1 year later for this image, same vista from the same location, 1820. A lovely painting. And if you go through that main gatehouse, it takes you into the courtyard of St James's Palace, and this is how it appeared in 1875. And our first photograph of the palace, 1895, and this is viewed from the Marlborough Road side, and you can see over to the left Friary Court, which in 1895 wasn't fenced and gated off as it is nowadays. 1896 for this photo, and it's back around the Pall Mall and Cleveland Row side, showing very prominently the gatehouse of its impressive clock. The gates open, and to either side of the gates are soldiers in their sentry boxes on sentry duty. 1900, and once again viewed from the Pall Mall and Cleveland Row side, the gatehouse shown in the centre, and by this point you can see the larger window to the Chapel Royal, and bear that Chapel Royal in mind for a very special upcoming video and photos that will be hitting the page soon. 1911, and this shows Friary Court, and what you see here is either the changing of the guard or the Sunday parade. The Sunday parade consists of the colour being marched amongst the troops, marched up to Buckingham Palace, and then marched back down here to be lodged at St James's Palace. And it would have been an impressive ceremony in those days, and it is an impressive ceremony nowadays. Bear that in mind as well, because hitting the page soon too will be a modern day Sunday parade. So if you like all that kind of thing, particularly the brass band music and the soldiers really performing amazing ceremonial, the British do ceremonial so well, you may enjoy watching that video. And our first images of the interior of St James's Palace are historic ones, before we get onto the modern day photos. And this shows the kitchen of St James's Palace in the time of King George III. Poor mad King George. And you can almost hear the pots and pans and the hustle and bustle of a late 18th century, early 19th century kitchen. This image and the ones you're going to see in a minute are a sequence of images that appeared in 1819 showing the palace interior, and this one's the King's Presence Chamber, the Queen's Levee Room, and the Guard Chamber with its impressive array of weaponry and beefeater type guards. This image shows the council chamber at St James's Palace in 1840, and the man standing up is Prince Albert, husband to Queen Victoria. And here we've got our modern day images, and these are public domain images that show the beautiful and really impressive interiors of the palace. This is its main stairway and entrance hall. This is a particularly impressive image, this one. It's looking right down through the doorways into the throne room. The King's Presence Chamber, as it once would have been called. And here you see the throne itself with the royal arms and canopy of estate above it. And the painting above the fireplace is King George IV, who was, before the death of his father, made Prince Regent when King George III went mad. And King George IV, when he was regent, was disrespectfully by some referred to as Prinny, and he most certainly wasn't one of England's popular kings, and with good reason. And I told you to bear in mind, didn't I, the accession council and this balcony. When a new monarch comes to the throne, they're proclaimed from this spot, and this is the proclamation of King Charles III, which occurred at St James's Palace in London, just 2 days after the death of the late Queen Elizabeth, and this is the 10th of September 2022. The proclamation of King Charles, St James's Palace, on Saturday the 10th of September 2022, and this is when he was declared our lawful, legal and undoubted king. Well, I hope you all enjoyed our little jaunt around St James's Palace, both present and past. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all on the next one.